Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Tuesday evening. It is 9 o'clock. Time for a live stream. But first, as always, little music. Enjoy.
We are all the heirs to Scotland, as a nation proudly stand. We will march beneath her banners to protect our ancient land. In the glens and cities, there on every street are the living heroes no army will defeat. Let a flag mean freedom and not a battle drum. To the world we bid a welcome in 1,000 different ways. We will toast to long lost friendships as we build our better days. In the glens and cities, there on every street are the living heroes no army will defeat. Let our flag mean freedom and not a battle drum. We are all the heroes of Scotland. We're a nation hand in hand. We will march beneath her banners to protect our ancient land. In the glens and cities, there on every street are the living heroes no army will defeat. Let our flag mean freedom and not a battle drum.
Good evening, folks. Nice to see Scott's Armour with us. And if he's so inclined, I can put in a link and you can come on for a short time or a long time and we can have a natter. But I won't fall out with you if you don't want to come on, that's fine. Nice to see you here anyway. I'll put that link in anyway at the moment while it's early in the evening. And remember, this is for Scott's Armour if he wants to come on for a while. Okay. Good evening, Treble M. Nice to see you. Hope you all had a good weekend, folks. And excellent, Scott's Armour, brilliant. I'll get my earplugs out. I'll see what Scott's Armour's got to say about what's going on. I'm sure I have lots to say. But seriously, folks, I hope you had a good weekend. The weather wasn't too bad, not so great today, I might add, but nevertheless, it's kind of more or less dry. Good evening, Raymond. Hope you're doing okay. And there is my dear lady Laura. Good evening, my dear. Hope you're feeling as well as you can. So we're just waiting on Scott's Armour to brew a cup of tea for himself, and we'll be talking with the man of the moment, so to speak. So I hope you've been doing your best, my dear, with your walking over the weekend, slowly, bit by bit, hopefully getting those legs stronger. Steve, what's this you're saying? A close friend had a stroke Saturday, John, straight after my son's 11th birthday party. Oh, God. It's always something, isn't it? Always something. Your boy's 11 now, goodness sake. At that age, I was preparing to sit an exam. Good evening, the Earl of Stair. Hope you're okay. October, good evening, sir. I am certainly okay as far as I know. I've learned to add that on at this age. Good question, Treble M. How is there, your pal? Heart attacks can go from one extreme to the other, as you all know. Let's hope it was on the mild side. Oh, there he is. Get my eardrums on. Hello there, sir. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Can we have?
Wonderful, wonderful.
Let's hear the volume.
Is that any better?
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah. Yep.
Right, that's grand. That's grand. How you been keeping?
Health-wise, as far as I know, and that's as much as you can say at this age. I'm all right. I think I've developed a smoker's cough after all these years, though, of heavy smoking. So there's not a lot I can say about that. I can't complain. Apart from that, all right. Yourself? If this is getting to do with your disappearance and you don't want to talk about it, Scots, just say so.
No, I suppose there's no better opportunity than just to have a good blether and let folks know what's been happening. You know, I do understand, because last night I spoke to DJ on the phone,
Uh-huh.
and call it ignorance, right? And I truly mean this, folks. Sometimes I'm on about people kind of are just communicating, letting each other know how everything is. And I was going through a period where I suppose I just needed to take stock of the situation. There was a couple
Sure.
of things going on, and rather than kind of I suppose kind of tap into things, because everybody's got too much on their plate. I'm one of these folks where I've got time for everybody. I'll listen, I'll communicate, and I'll be there for them. But I don't like to put my problems onto other people, and I just needed time to kind of just take stock of things and get myself into a better place. Because, well,
Sure.
I'm not going to lie, I was pretty burnt out with a number of things, and I just, rather than kind of do it in dribs and drabs, I thought just give myself a clean focus just to recharge the batteries and get my headspace correct. And
Sure. Sure.
I'm in that place now, truth be told. So that's why it kind of probably seemed that, one day things were there, then the next everything just kind of caught off. But during this episode, and it's an absolute kick in the teeth, I've lost my Telegram and other things. So there was kind of a buffer there when I started to kind of I just want to get my head back in, dip my toes in the water, and
Sure.
start doing things. So I've kind of had to just. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's good that I've still got the YouTube thing, but in terms of like the wider people, like speaking with people like yourself or
Yeah.
Sensum or DJ and Clive and Steve Crane and all the rest of the guys, that ability there was non-existent for the sheer fact that my telegrams it's now being deleted. But I'll get back to that another day. It's just good to
Sure.
come back and communicate and see old faces and just see that everybody's doing well.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I have explained that many times to my audience. Although it looks easy to be sitting here just chatting, after all, he's just talking. But we both know it's a lot more than that. And when you're looking for material, that means that you've got to spend time watching this stuff, which very rarely is ever happy. And that has an effect on all of us. And when you're doing it for a long period of time, it's got an accumulative effect. And you feel it. I mean, you really do feel it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of things that pull you down, but more importantly, and I've been in this mindset for quite some time, and it's funny because DJ kind of made the point last night that there is, in my opinion, there is no means to dabble with politics. And it's kind of like the question that I that repeatedly kept getting seen is, well, what's your take? What's your answer on something? And I always kind of stressed I don't have all the answers. I can just give an honest look through my own observation and put it out there. Whether folk agree with that on those two different things, and if there's
Sure.
folk that agree with it, then maybe we're seeing there's common denominators between that. But if there's folk that disagree and they have what they think is an answer to something, then grand, I'm all ears and I want to hear that. But the way that things have been going the last wee while, it's all dark, and it has been dark for a while. But I just feel with the scope that's on kids in schools right now, it completely wore me thin. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
the thing is which is quite foolish of myself, John. On a serious note, to kind of engage with it on a matter of trying to address it as a format of this is a hurdle that we can do within a one-to-one political debate and whatever framework you want to phrase that. It's no these things are spiritual, to say the least, and you don't win spiritual battles with doing things of the mind and the flesh, because that's just not how you do things. And very foolish me, it's near enough burnt me completely out. But you know what? There's nothing that a little recharge, a little taking stock, and now I'm back in amongst it, cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak.
No, you're absolutely right, but I've been saying that for long enough that I don't really consider myself to be engaging in politics at all, even when I'm talking, quote, politics, unquote. To me, it's very simple. It comes down to we're engaged in a war against evil, and that makes us by default the good guys. And that doesn't make us perfect, but we know what we're fighting against. We know what we stand for. But I know from a lifetime of experience and of the spirit world, it drains the energy, and no more so than this area because, as you know, we look at material, we see material, we read material that is just utterly depressing because it shouldn't be happening under any circumstances. And that drains. It drains you spiritually as well as emotionally and ultimately physically as well. And so you're
Yeah,
bound to
and
get
it's a lot
down.
of people forget that, John. That's a good point, though. A lot of people kind of like rule that element out. Um, Everything's multi-layered, and sometimes when you're so fixated on one thing, it's kind of a hard to see the greater context of the picture, if you like, behind it.
Yeah,
So, I think as well, we can get too fixated on things that are a symptom of the actual root of the problem.
yeah, yeah,
And I have also been guilty of that. I've looked at things and spoke about issues, and I've been on stream before, and I've turned around and kind of like pointed the finger at the Parliament in Edinburgh. The Parliament in Edinburgh has got a lot to answer for, definitely, and so is a puppet prostitutes in charge. But the bottom line of it is it's a dog and pony show, as DJ would say. It's all theatre, and that is a symptom of the design that is currently in place. And you're not going to beat the symptom; you've got to get to the root of it. And the
yeah.
root of it obviously comes from these books and philosophies of an absolute evil origin.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then you run into the problem, do you know, then, Scots, that, and I have given this a lot of thought, and before I ask the question, I'll be honest and tell you I don't have a definitive answer to this problem. But if we have great libraries and we want to have great libraries, do we have the confidence to leave these books on the shelf? If we're going to call ourselves free thinkers.
The thing with that term is it's open interpretation. For example, you'll have people who, I'll use myself as part example of this. Right, I believe in God. People
Yep,
may not necessarily believe in God, right, but I believe in God. I believe that God came in this world as a man, died on the cross, rose 3 days later. We're saved through grace.
yep,
I believe that everything that we're currently living in is pretty much play for play in the Book of Revelations, but it doesn't mean that I shut myself off to other things that could kind of link in with that, because ultimately you're saved by faith, but knowledge and facts and content is also important because that gives you context to things that are happening and things that are also relatable. And this is what I talked about, things being multi-layered. Now, on the flip side of that, you get people that necessarily do not believe. I have spoken with some folk that have put themselves in the field of they're flat out atheists. They don't believe anything. They don't look at anything, quote unquote, scripture. And by definition, at the same time, they don't necessarily you'd believe in quote unquote conspiracy theories. So when you talk to people about Agenda 21, Agenda 30, the WEF, the United Nations, basically trying to strip us all people on this earth of our absolute sovereign heritage within each individual nation of this planet. They can't buy into it because there's books on the shelves in libraries that are propagating these minds to basically think along a certain narrative. So when we use the term free thinker, I think we also play into the position of, labelling folk with their terminologies, i.e., the Karen card. I believe what we should be advocating promoting on every single front that we possibly can is to engage in critical conversation and critical thought. Because if people are open to interpretations and turn around and say, for example, look, me and you're having this conversation right now, you may have things that you say that I agree with. I may say things that you disagree with, and you might actually show me something that I'm new to and go, do you know what? I didn't know that. That's information. That's something learned because every day is a learning day. I think we should encourage that part because that's when we can understand and ultimately grow, not as individuals, but together as a community and as people. And that's what ultimately we need to seek to do. We don't need to piss on each other because there's too much of that in the world, if you don't mind my language.
Sorry there, I muted my mic because I was coughing. No, I don't mind the languages at all, Scots, and I would agree with that. And I found in my short experience last year of canvassing at the local elections that when I approached people and spoke to them, they were very receptive to things that I was saying to them. And I was trying not to lead people and trying not to box them in any way by saying, oh, do you vote for this law or that law? I tried to keep it focused, the conversation focused on what I thought were important local uh, difficulties. And everyone I spoke to were completely open ended about the way they responded to me. But I think the biggest problem is it not. It might be quite different when you're younger. I think the difficult thing is meeting people who don't agree with us but are not deaf to anything but their own side. And I think that's a huge problem, the amount of propaganda that some younger people have lived under. Don't you think that it's pretty bad for those ones, especially people who have gone to university and into social sciences? Because that's where the problem, one of the major avenues of the problem comes from. And I've often said, Scots, if I had the power, I would force all universities in this country to go back to the levels in social science departments and faculties, back to the levels of pre-Second World War. And that would just immediately limit the number of undergrads that they could take in at any one time. And that would be a good start.
Um, there's a passage in the book of Proverbs 22:3 says the prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. And that's kind of like the culture that's been adopted within the society. There is people out in the streets that don't know any wiser that are suffering, whether it's through forms of not being able to heat their homes, or they can't get jobs, or they can't get housing, or people are on the streets homeless, or people are waiting hours and hours and hours for a bloody doctors to phone them back. And
Sure.
there's a lot of people out here within these institutions of quote unquote, public service that absolutely chat a good game about wanting to do what's right for the people. But everything that has been done to the people within the last 100 years have came through those quote unquote democratic structures themselves. We have teachers that are standing at the school gates with a straight face telling parents, that they welcome all children in, and they're going to basically go to school to do their A, B's, and C's, but they're not. They're learning about Adam and Steve, and the amount of bullying that goes on in the schools is basically being cast away because they don't want to see it upset certain apple carts. That the whole thing is absolutely insidiously disgusting, and these are the people that are actually making genuinely innocent, decent people suffer because of their ignorance, because they don't have that natural, I would say, uprightness within them to challenge certain narratives. And this is kind of like what we've seen play out with, for example, Brexit. And the reason why I constantly use Brexit is because Brexit, no matter what way, if you're left, right, up, down, whatever, I genuinely, for this matter, folks, I don't care. I really don't. Brexit is quite funny, the most comedy and should be political shattering pill that you can take when you see people that turn around and told you, if you vote for this, you're definitely going to get this outcome. The outcome never came. But on the flip side of that, in a quote unquote democratic vote, you had people that turned around and says, despite your wish to go down that road, you're ill educated, despite your trust in that system, but you need to vote for us and we'll reverse that and do the damage that you have done. So it doesn't matter what way you spin it, there's always going to be a final outcome. And the only way to really stop that from happening is to disengage with it. Start conversing about the root of the problem. And therefore, a lot of people who are naive or maybe just simply don't want the hassle of engaging with these things might be a wee bit smarter to make more better informed choices. Because the people who should be basically leading the pack are the wolves in sheep clothing that we need to basically kind of stay back from.
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, they have to go, of course. One of my great disappointments was last year, as the election was taking place, I decided it would be a good idea, not for me personally, but for everyone concerned, to try and set up a regular protest round the primary schools. And I was hugely disappointed when I got no support from any of the churches.
You won't. You see the thing with the churches. The churches is it's very sad to say, and I really mean this. The churches are a no-go. You've got ministers and priests and everything else in between, just bending the knee. When, quite frankly, the only person you should be bound to in this life should be Jesus Christ. And people might think that's a funny thing to say, but I say that from the bottom of my heart. I can't be any more sincere with folk when I say that. You have people that are taking the knee in any kind of fashion whatsoever, are bowing down to an ungodly and a despicable narrative. In the churches, they're meant to be the teachers. Technically speaking, they're meant to be there as a pillar of community to lead by example. And what we're seeing is over the last number of years is that the churches have been mocked, the churches have been ridiculed by the representations of themselves. Now, the churches came out in some capacity and told you all this absolute BS about the Ukraine and how we need to do this for Ukraine and do that for Ukraine, whilst we've got this absolute gimp, and I mean that with 100% sincerity. We've got this absolute gimp, piece, puppet, bitch thing, whatever. It's like a Sam Smith. It's a they them. As far as I'm concerned, a man in spandex who's going round and making some kind of a world call on a crusade of justice whilst he's burning Orthodox churches in the Ukraine to the ground. But here, wait a minute, you'll not hear that from Rishi Sunak because it doesn't suit the narrative, because anything that is pure within our Western world that we hold dear, that ties us as a people, something that's going to lead us out of this filth, something that's going to give us a way to look to try and navigate through the fields of this absolute degeneracy that we're in, they're going to close that down. They're absolutely going to shit on it. So don't look at Sunak, don't look at Trump, don't look at Elon Musk, don't look at any of these folks. Look at Jesus Christ, because right now, folks, and I mean this, and it's been slowly, gradually building up for the longest time. I say at any point since the start of the 1900s, there have been clearly whispers and tyrants and slurs against the church, to the point right now that any religion worldwide, whether that be Judaism, whether that be Hinduism, whether that be Sikhism, or anything else, right, you're not allowed to upset any of these faiths, but you can absolutely burn churches to the ground. They're removing Jesus Christ from the books. And the absolute strange thing is which I think this is where you see the true fruits growing on this. You'll hear people of the Islamic faith saying, we believe in Jesus also. Well, Jesus is a great prophet, but yet they'll happily sit back and burn the churches. So we know that Jesus is in the book of Islam. We know that Jesus is in the book of the Sikhs and everyone else. They will tell you Jesus is a way to heaven, but yet Christianity is being bombarded and disregarded and spat on by these evil bastards, because they know simply that the only way in this world to be saved is through Jesus. That's why I turn and tell folks, disengage with the degeneracy, the attack on children. Stand upright, keep your ears close, keep them safeguarded from it, but don't engage with anything. And I mean that through political, through the terms of media, through the terms of music. Shut it all off. You don't need it. So when you get back to the point of the church should be using that as an emphasis to actually shine a light in the world, but they don't. They have no part. They do not want to entertain it, John, which shows you how fucking corrupt and bent the church as an institution is. The only person that I've seen throughout the whole jibby-jabby narrative was a parish minister or a parish bishop, I think, from Australia, called Mary Emmanuel, and a Syrian Orthodox leader who spoke openly with his back upright and told people how it is, to such a degree that the Catholic Church and other church representatives came out and actually chastised the man. So that tells us everything that we need to know about the church.
For goodness sake. I'm glad you brought this up, because I can't escape from the idea that this land that we call Ukraine is being systematically emptied of white Christians.
You know, I think I've done this. This is going back way back at the start when I done my streams, and I kind of asked that question, why, on so many fronts. But the bottom line of it is it's very clear when you read the Bible, when you get the context of the Bible, the time, the places, the people, where's, whens, and everything else in between. When you understand things, when the context is there and explained to you within a detail that simply cannot be denied, when you get it at its purest form, when the fruit is ripe, things make sense. And ultimately, truly, there is no chance that they're going to stop at this.
Of course not.
They're not going to stop. It's going to ramp up and ramp up and ramp up and ramp up. Now, we could all sit here and say we need to do this and we need to do that. As much as, all these ideas are great, ultimately we have to think about, and I'll use again the Ukraine thing as an example.
Yeah.
For the last 200 years, there has been an onslaught of division within Europe. and most parts of the world out with Europe have been remotely on a large scale, largely on scales has been totally unaffected by this because the majority of these wars have happened in Europe, out with the Middle East. But then again, it's white people it's the Caucasian people that they send over into the Middle East to do the dirty work,
Yeah,
and
of course.
all these populations have been allowed to boom and explode in kind of a just populate at free will, whilst Europe has been taking an absolute hammering. Millions of men, millions of boys. Even in modern times, now we've got women. Very sadly to say, we've got women coming back in body bags, and that isn't by sheer coincidence. That's by default. It's to get the numbers plummeted down to stop the influence. It's to stop us growing. It's to stop us gaining more strength and more intellectual ability. It's to hamper us to such a point where no matter what way we try and spin things, we'll be in an impossible situation to fight ourselves out a corner based on numbers. And the thing is when you look at history, and I truly mean this as well, folks. When you look at history, the greatest wars weren't won by numbers. They were won by leaders that were intellectually smarter than those round about them, people that could articulate things at the right time, motivators that could get men to do the most tiresome but yet incredible things at the lowest points, and people that just absolutely had the will to thrive in an impossible situation. And that's
Yeah,
what it's going to. That's what it's going to take for us. That's what it's going to take for us as a people, because when it all boils down, there's a quote in the Bible, it's in the book of John. Jesus tells you, like, don't worry if the world hates you because it hated him first. He endured and he overcame the world. We will endure as European people, and we will overcome this. There is no ifs, buts, or what in between. That is fact. That will happen. I may
oh yeah,
not be here.
yeah,
I may not be here to see that, but we will overcome this. We will endure, and we will be hell head high walking through this. Because see, sometimes you've got to go through an absolute turmoil to grow and reconcile and heal. And for the large part of us as European peoples, that's something that we absolutely need to done. It needs to happen, whether it's English and Scots and Irish, or whether it's Poles and Germans and Austrians. Collectively, we need to heal, because spiritually speaking, over the last 200 years, with the amount of wars that we've had as a people, we haven't had a breather. This is the final hurdle. We will overcome this. We will see another day. We will be standing tall at the end of it.
absolutely well said, sir. Well said. I couldn't agree more. I've never given up hope myself, although I stick to the assumption that there is a place for politics in all of this, a way forward. Perhaps not big politics, but I was saying just last week, even if we only had one person on a council and the Woodlanders Initiative was buying land in that same area, that one person on that one council could help makes things smoother for the buying of land, for example. And I'm trying to encourage people to think along the lines, especially in England, when you've got these church councils, but you've also got school councils as well as local councils. And we should be involved in these things, because otherwise, if we don't do something, nothing will change.
Um, I mean, when you think about it, John, right, on a
Yeah.
serious note, it makes sense on paper. That looks good. That looks like something that's feasible, something that many people could do. But the practicality is you would have maritime law that would literally just
Mm.
shred that up overnight, and it doesn't really matter about how much land that you build, because I think like ultimately it's like admiral law, maritime law, that kind of like takes precedence over absolutely everything, and it was something that I was kind of unaware of until I seen a video with Bill Cooper explaining it. And the way he kind of articulates this and lays it out isn't only fascinating, but you can actually see the true proof of the pudding. So if folks are kind of a bit interested in that, I would kind of advise that would be my go-to source, if you like, for that, because and naturally speaking as well, having your own land, you would be able to do your own fruit, vegetables, and it'd be fantastic. You'd become that, and I hate to use this term, I know DJ's in your chat, and he's probably going to throw a shoe through a window, but you would be self-sustaining, you know?
Yeah.
You truly would be. But this is where we come against another, if you want to call it, pawn in the game. It doesn't, and people might get switched off with this, but I believe it to be true. I think there's enough evidence to say that it's true. This is when they spray all this shit from the planes and everything else that falls down onto the crops that you're basically eating top of already pesticide sprayed GMOs. The soil and everything's all pretty much, pardon my language, wrecked. Absolute wreck. So we can kind of have damage limitations within certain scenarios, but ultimately, I don't think that's going to be. It's like what we need, but sometimes what you need, or it's what we'd think that we need, but it's not necessarily what's going to be the road for us, because the road that we're going to need to eventually get at, where we don't have any of these issues, is going to be something completely left field to such an extent. And I'll use another example of this, right?
Yeah, please do.
We have in this country Scots law, right? Everything is pretty much embedded and built upon the Declaration of Arbroath in this country.
Yeah.
Now, as DJ has done many videos before, they're trying to incorporate United Nations laws and legislations within Scots law. You can't do that because UN is just something that's come out with since the 50s or 60s, I believe. It's a foreign entity. It's not fit for Scots law. If they start implementing things within Scots law, then Scots law basically evaporates overnight, which means it's a hybrid, which means every technical law, freedom, luxury and right that you have as a sovereign Scot on this soil right now basically dies with it, and you're in a completely different dimension altogether in terms of how you can do things within this country.
Yeah, very correct. But just a small point of correction. The UN was the people who put together the UN met for the very first time in late 1943, when it was quite clear to everyone except Adolf Hitler that Germany had lost the war, so that it would be up and ready and running after the war finally came to an end in Europe. Scots, I don't understand why people listen to that organization at all. It's never been clear to me where its authority supposedly comes from. And then on top of all of that, people seem to forget, or perhaps don't know, that the four major countries that won the war in Europe and the Pacific gave themselves seats and they couldn't be removed, which makes it the whole thing just nonsense. And again, in a dream world where I were the prime minister of this country, I would just ignore them, because they shouldn't and don't really have any authority over a sovereign nation as we are supposed to be. And that's how I would treat them. But I would have to explain to the people of the country, of course, if you take on the UN, you're going to have to do without something. They will do their best to come after you.
Well, the last person that I know that stood up to the UN and who's another culprit to blame is that slimy, greasy alien Mr. Blobby-like character within a Bill Gates gimp suit. The last person that stood up to him and the United Nations was on the jib jab thing was the president of Tanzania. He
Oh,
wouldn't get on board with the rollout, and that man paid the price.
yeah, he didn't last long. He didn't last long.
Which is quite again, this is just another example that you can use when you come quote unquote all things democratic. The bottom line of it is you hear these things about trust the science and trust this one because we're meant to be in more intelligent times and more technologically advanced times, but yet we have a lot of people that are not ready to kind of just look at things differently, or people that are totally disengaged where they shut off, and you probably sitting there talking to them about trying to see the truth with
Mm,
until the cows come home, and their hearts are too hardened for that right now. Again, these
yeah.
things are spoken about in the Bible, but the bottom line of it is it's going to take something drastic, and it is going to be drastic. I mean, I think right now we're about, on a serious note, about 18 months away from Sears. That this is a new Event 101 thing that's been trialed by Bill Gates, and that 101 was obviously the predetermined simulation for what happened with, I'll not say the first word, but 19, so that everyone
Yeah.
kind of gets a drift with that. And as well, we're obviously being reminded that the whole global financial system is about to have a meltdown on top of a great cyber crash. Is that man who looks like an absolute burnt thumb, Klaus Schwab, would be reminding us as well. So I think in the next 18 to 24 months, these people who are totally switched off and they're not wanting to see the devil or the fox at the door because they've got the luxuries are going to be sadly caught off guard when it's not the fact that they won't have their luxuries. They will literally be fighting for whatever little that they have because civil unrest is going to take over. And it's sad, but we're already seeing things like this playing out in other countries on a micro level. I
Mm,
think a number, and again, an example to use to back that up, there was an experiment that they done was cashless in India several years ago, and the queues were so big with people trying to get groceries to such a degree that there was parts of India, where the police basically wouldn't go into them because the civil unrest was so bad they didn't know how to tackle it. So they just basically waited till everything died down and the government gave them the nod to turn and say, right, this is now what's going to happen and we're going to kind of revert back to normal.
yeah.
But the damage has already been done within those communities because people didn't heed the warning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you think of the amount of enormous food processing plants that have been destroyed in America, and how can anyone see that? I'm talking about normal people in the street, Americans. How can Americans look at all of that and not think there's something peculiar going on? If you then just say, well, how many of those sizes of plants, how many of those were burned down mysteriously in the last 10 years? Very few, if any, I would suggest. And you would think that people would start questioning something. Do you not? I
Well,
just
here's the
find that,
thing, John. I'll use a better one. I'll use a better
yeah,
one, mate. Right. You have in this country the government that has just passed a bill that is going to affect people from John O'Groats to Land's End and our friends over in Northern Ireland and our friends down in Wales, where ASDA is going to be having fruits and vegetables that have been basically, if you want to call it genetically coded with pharmaceuticals, like vaccine strains and stuff in them. This is no lie. This is something that you can go on, readily available on the Gov website for everybody to check. And people are still shopping at Asda. I think we've got to a point where we're inherently lazy because years ago, people done a lot of hard work and people were showing skills of homesteading and they took pride in trying to make themselves accountable for the stuff that they had. Whereas now, or especially, I would say perhaps maybe since the 70s and 80s, where the supermarket chains just imploded onto the scene, it's a one cap fits all. You don't need to do anything. We don't need to grow food anymore. We don't need to homestead anymore because everything's just so easily laid on in convenience. But again, it goes back to that old saying: when something's, too good to be true, that is usually the case because the supermarkets for years have been poisoning people with their seed oils and poisoning people with their genetically modified fish and poisoning people through food that basically isn't fit for consumption. But because the corporations have a big say in what happens on your tables and in your life, they get a green pass on it. And such a level, by the way, folks, that people in Oregon, when Obama was in charge, were being jailed for collecting rainwater. Jailed for collecting rainwater. In Scotland, you need a permit to go and catch a fish. A permit. In Scotland, to catch a fish, you need a permit to go to certain camping places in Scotland. This is an absolute complete restriction on people's ability to make themselves accountable and not rely on the machine, because the machine needs people and obedient workers at that, so that when the bull comes in to chase the sheep into the fence, that there is no one that gets astray. And this has all been a deliberate ploy right along to the point right now where people are inherently lazy with what they're doing with their own means.
Well said, and I would agree with what you're saying. And it always comes back to the same point, does it not? Is it within our ability collectively um, to change minds and hearts, or do we have to trust then that obviously there is a bigger plan and we don't know what that plan is, that it'll all come out right in the end, so to speak? And yet, if you take that view, Scots, that's actually quite contrary to what Jesus would say. Jesus wasn't this passive guy that you could slap around. This is a man who's living in an occupied country, for goodness sake, preaching what he's preaching. You know, he's living, I would say he's an activist in you know what I'm saying? He's trying to infuse his spirit into their spirit through his stories and parables and all that. But he did say that if a man needed to, he should sell his best cloak to buy a sword.
There's a quote in the Bible, and it's in the book of Ezekiel 38:7, and it says, "Be prepared and prepare yourself, you and all your companies that are assembled about you, and be a guard for them." And that's the thing with free will in some aspect, that you have the choice whether you want to engage, whether you want to disengage, whether you want to prepare, whether you don't want to prepare. You are accountable by your actions, and that kind of predetermines the consequences, what happens. Now, there is times where that can seem somewhat not the case, because bad things can happen to good people. But that isn't necessarily the good person's at fault for that. That's a symptom of the world, sadly to say. And when we talk about Jesus, I mean, I think a worthwhile point to interject here would be that if we look at the story when the Romans take him in the garden,
Yeah.
Peter pulls out a sword and he tells him, "Put back your sword. Now is not the time."
Yeah.
He could have
Now
gone.
is
He
not.
could have.
Yeah.
He could have just went. Do you know what? Go for it. Go for it. But the thing is certain things need to happen.
Yes, of
And
course.
if you look at Europe in this aspect, right, just to kind of give a bit, at least the way that I would view it from modern context, right? If you
Sure.
look at the way that Europe's been, right, Europe has been Christendom for the longest time. It's been a proud bearer of good, upstanding moral values, family first. I mean, people like to say like the Italians are very family orientated. So the Scots, so the
Oh
English,
God,
so the Danish. That's a European thing, and I dare say it's a thing for many people around the world, right? But
yeah,
we just kind of had to be the standard bearer for it. It doesn't make you better than anybody else. It was just within our society as a whole. Now, over X amount of years, that's completely transformed and morphed into something that our grandparents and our parents and maybe even parts of ourselves don't even resemble. That's because a lot of people's minds has been propagated with all the the hearsay of the day, all these different views, all these different lifestyles, all these different ideas and philosophies, and being pushed by media, being pushed by the papers, being pushed by influencers, being pushed by governments, has subjected people's minds to absolute deterioration, where the things that we held dear is just nothing more than a memory of the fickle past, really.
yeah,
And I believe the closer that we as a people kind of embrace that old sentiment and bring it back into everyday living, the closer we'll get as people. The communities will be united more, the closer we'll get to God, and there'd be a natural transformation of us coming out of that into a much better society. And that's why I think right now, and I kind of made that reference earlier on, it's not really going to be done by who has the best army. It's not going to be done by who has the best regiment or organisation or the best military setup or the best country. This is going to be done by the brightest and our best, because for the longest time, that's basically who's built Europe out the hellholes over different parts of recorded history. It's going to be done by it under the grace of God. And when it happens, you've got to pay a toll for a better world.
oh yeah,
Jesus,
yeah,
Jesus paid a toll. We have allowed ourselves to fall short. We have allowed our character to be basically pissed on, our values to be pissed on, our churches to be burnt, and we are paying the toll for that. And people might not necessarily agree nor like the words that I'm saying, but the one thing that I'm absolutely being with you folk when I say that is sincere. And that's one thing that I absolutely try to do. Now, that's where my views are on it. Again, if you have something different to say, I'm all for it. I welcome it.
Well, I can't say anything, Scott, because this is uh, this is where I am and have been growing closer to it for long enough now. It comes down to uh, this, and it sounds egotistical, but it's certainly not meant in that way. But in our own little way, people like yourself and myself and many others that are here listening to us uh, are the modern crusaders. And we're doing, in our own way, what 300 years ago priests and ministers did. We're trying to feed our people a sense of spirituality, and we're trying ultimately to regain Christendom. That's the battle that we're in. It's a spiritual one.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, see, MYT is that might. If I butchered that name, I'm absolutely apologise. But it made a comment: materialism, money has become a god for our people, and this is the thing. So the most backed currency, the most used currency in the world is American dollar. On that dollar, in God we trust, by the temple and all seeing eye.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, we look at the banking cartels, the banking institutions themselves. They're pretty non-Christian. I mean, the fact that usury is in play, wide scale accepted all over Christian countries, is something that is very much Old Testament no. And I
Oh
think
yeah,
as
yeah.
well, you asked me some time ago when we had DJ and myself on, if you had the ability to change one thing, what would you do? And I said to you at the time, would abolish usury. But
Yeah.
that right there is absolute another proof of the pudding. The way that the world has been structured around money, and they take Jesus Christ, right? Jesus Christ, who is literally the most intelligent, purest, articulate, caring, loving, by the grace of God, to walk this earth. They have took that name, tied it to an absolute pagan date, and made it the most materialistic, greedy, gluttonous, tiring day of the calendar. And people still can't read between the lines on it.
Yeah.
But again, this is things that have been adopted and passed down to us by government, by church, by influencers. That's why I say a lot of folk, when I was talking earlier in the stream, a lot of folk are looking to people and thinking that's our guy. They aren't our guy. Regardless as much likeable that they come across, they aren't our guy. They will not be our guy. Our guy is a guy that is in a level way above them that they'll never be able to comprehend, or myself for that matter. But the bottom line of it is, when there's proof of the pudding, folks, there's proof in the pudding. And we've got to take that and we've got to use that to our advantage, not to ignore it, not to navigate with it, take it, work it, and come to your own conclusions, but at least be honest with yourself, because me, for someone for many years who trying to take things when I had an answer and try to say, well, there must be a counter side to that and there must be another truth within that, you get yourself tied up in knots. The world, people say the world's a complex place. No, it's not. The world is literally simplified as this. It's a mess. It's good versus evil. It's spiritual. The end.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about where I am. That's where I am. We may differ slightly on other parts of that, but essentially we're on the same road here, Scots. And everyone needs to be on that same road because it is the only road there is. As I say, you're seeing everything that I say in my own way. I think you're putting it very straightforwardly, better than I say it. I think I'm too complex at times, but I couldn't agree more on what you're saying. And by the way, I finished the book, by the way, and it does mention Ukraine in it, of long ago, of course. That's why I brought it up. The Ukraine thing.
Ukraine is a situation where there is going to be twists and turns, and as quickly as that war started, it's going to just vanish completely under the rug, in my opinion. But that's the whole theatre of it, because it was the exact same thing that happened to Saudi Arabia and the war with Yemen. It was the exact same thing that went on, which felt it was dragged out, but parts of it were, but by and large it wasn't. As quickly as it was on the news, it was off, back on, off. Was the shit that happened in Syria? Pardon my language.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was they were calling it a World War III tension between Pakistan and India. That went right under the carpet, and all of these things is just another ploy in getting people's minds warped with fear porn. If people are constantly living in fear, they'll never have their eyes on the greater picture, what's behind that. They'll never leave their homes. They'll never go out and converse with people. If people just live, like hoarders and isolated in their homes, like people did during lockdown, and waited for the advice by the prostitute puppets elected to tell you, by the way, you're allowed out between 4 and 6, but if you're 6:05, you better test, you better do 10 press ups, you better do 10 star jumps, you better take a hot bath, and you better not have your music over 8 because things can happen. This is the mindset that has been allowed to fester in because pretty much, and I've said this continuously through the stream, we have been propagated by fear for the longest time, and it just feels like since September 2001, there has been nothing but war porn on the television. And
Oh, yeah.
sometimes when people get too much of the one thing, they become desensitized to it. And sometimes when you become desensitized to things, it can be absolutely terrible, like we're seeing playing out in the schools right now.
Mm, absolutely. I told you, well, but perhaps I didn't. I go to the same butcher anytime I'm going to buy meat. And of course, you get to know the staff a little bit. I started speaking to this older lady about politics, and she was an SNP voter. And I asked her, did she have grandchildren? Because she looked like a granny. And she did. And they're in school, primary school, of course. And I started then talking about this transgender stuff to her and explained to her that this was being uh, forced into the schools unknowingly for the most part on part of parents, etc., etc. And I left her with all of that. And then after the election was over, I happened to be in the shop again. And I just asked calmly and quietly, so who did you vote for? She said, SNP. I couldn't believe it. And she had already insisted on moving her granddaughter, thinking that this would allow her to escape from this. She didn't seem to appreciate this is in all schools. But to go on then and vote for that same party who's doing this is staggering to me. I just find it staggering that people behave in this way. Do you get any thoughts about that, Scots? Why people do that? It's a habit.
Well, again, that's it's multi-layered, because when you look at Scottish independence, Scottish independence isn't Scottish independence. Scottish independence activism is pretty much like BLM activism. It's not about inherently making lives better for black people. It's a controlled opposition by trained Marxists there to degrade communities and basically just to pretty much set cats among the pedestrians to cause nothing but violence and vandalism, to try and be an absolute menace within society. And that's what the SNP activism is. They're trained Marxists. They're absolute scum. They're degenerate. They're pushing unholy narratives in school. They're there to separate communities. They're not there for the betterment of Scotland. They don't respect Scotland. They do not like or represent anything remotely Scottish at that. We've seen clear examples of that to such a degree, and I do not mean this in a heinous way, but if you're in the Scottish Parliament, you should be speaking English since it's the biggest used language in the world. Ideally, we'd be learning Scots Gaelic in schools, but we haven't had that, and it's not going to happen on a wide scale manner across the country. But you should at least be speaking that if you have the ability to in Parliament. But yet we've got people that's coming into positions of power within Holyrood, and they're speaking tongues not native to this language, which I don't agree with. They're bringing in cultures and ideas and religious practices to implement on a parliamentary level that isn't based on Scots law. So the SNP, in my mind, the whole thing that is that universalism where they're concepting and they're trying to take away diversity. I don't really like using that word. But when
Mm.
you go to Africa, Africa isn't full of Africans. Cameroonians are somewhat ethnically and completely different at the same time as those who are from Somalia. If you're trying to universalise two different people as one, isn't that a wee bit hateful? And the mere fact that you've got the SNP and the SNP cultists that religiously follow these folks as absolute devotees can't read between the lines on that one, never mind kind of a difference between a Frenchman and a Scotsman. You're never going to be onto a winner in that one. So again, when it comes to these people with these mindsets, don't be rude, don't be ignorant, just naturally disengage and talk about the weather, because that's as probably as useful and as intelligent as a conversation's going to get.
Yeah. Well, I did encounter
Just to, sorry,
three.
just to add to that one,
Sure.
I had a conversation with someone who's of the same mindset, and they were saying, I'm going to be getting another booster, etc., etc. And I had kind of made a point, in the United States that there was a big settlement with Pfizer. They had to pay £2.3 billion for obviously its illegal usage of and promoting drugs that weren't approved by the FDA. And they just looked at me and they were like, yeah, but I mean, the scientific bodies tell you. So again, don't get upset with the individual. Just talk about something else. I said, you know what? I wish you a good day. On you go. Because some people, no matter how much periphery pudding you want to put in their face, they just don't want to eat it. They can take a horse to water. Doesn't mean that the horse is necessarily going to drink. And I don't like using Darwinian terminologies, but at that point, it becomes survival of the fittest.
Yeah. Well, I had this short engagement with him about this transgender stuff in the school, and one of them foolishly said, "Yes, but when I was in school, we got sex education." I said, "Listen, I'm older than you." No, you didn't. What you got was a story about birds and bees, and you were left to work out what all of that meant. So don't give me your lies. And ultimately, believe it or not, Scots, the three of them ran, and I mean ran away from an
Oh,
old
I could
guy.
believe that. I could believe that. I mean, you've got this. Richard Lucas in the Scottish Family Party. People do not necessarily like him. I don't have enough judgment on the chap to make any informed decision. But he did hold. We've all seen the video. He did hold John Swinney very much accountable on that subject, and he spoke about the very famous banana video. Now, if you've got any man or woman, child or childless for that matter, and you go through the itinerary that's in that criteria, and you show them the videos that, again, in this meeting, that adults didn't think was appropriate. So if it's not appropriate for adults, how on earth is this going to be appropriate for children at high school, never mind primary school or early years? So when people kind of are like, yeah, I mean, it's healthy. No, it's not. Do you know what? You've just absolutely laid your card on the table as a nonce. I will speak to you like a nonce. I will treat you like a nonce, because if you can condone that for children, there is something fundamentally
Mhm.
wrong within your
Absolutely.
thinking capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's I used to have this little example I would give to people when anything like this ever came up in conversation. And I would say, imagine this, it's Saturday morning, you've got mum and dad, they're in bed, and there is one child in the house. It happens to be a little girl. And at 10 o'clock, the bedroom door busts open and the wee girl comes bouncing into the bed between mum and dad. And a woman walks past. What will she see? A happy family. Take the same scene, take the same little girl, and now make her 11 and see what happens when the same person passes the bedroom and looks in. What will they see? Well, it's all about morality now. Some people will see a happy family still, and a few people will see something lurid. And it's that what causes people to see a set of circumstances which, let us, for the sake of conversation, assume is perfectly innocent. And yet another person looking at the same scene will see something unacceptable there. And I've always been fascinated as to how that difference arises.
Yeah, I mean, see, the ultimate thing within all this, and when you were talking there about that, there was a video, in fact, that I think DJ had shown on one of his videos that he streamed some time ago, and it was pretty much kind of a just, if I'm right in saying, at the time it was quote unquote untraditional families. Again, I'm trying to be mindful of my language here. Um, in kind of exposing these books to children.
Yeah.
These things all stem back to the language used by these corporate prostitutes in Parliament, breaking down barriers, smashing glass ceilings, opening new horizons. These are things that people go, well, I quite like a change, but the change that you're wanting isn't the change that they're promoting, and the change that you're wanting isn't going to be on the cards, because the mess that you're living in comes from those previous, new barriers, previous smash ceilings, and all the rest of it. All these word plays is another part of propagating and trying to normalise all this bullshit onto impressionable minds. But it's a scary thing, because I was thinking about this earlier on. Scotland was a somewhat small, respectable country with excellent education,
Yeah.
albeit it had its problems, but it was kind of a like rough on the outside with a really decent centre with integrity. And now we don't even have this rough exterior. We're just absolutely smothered in soy paste with an absolute degenerate core, with a comedy level education, because now we have got adults with no ability to think for themselves, no ability. And you see this in videos over social media where they'll turn around and say, that person's a racist, despite the person not actually saying anything racist. Okay, what makes that person racist? Because they just are. They don't have that ability to even answer a question anymore.
No.
And this speaks levels. Truly, it speaks levels about the damage that has been done to the minds, and everything can be put back to, and I'm sorry to use the term, but it's been very repetitive tonight, and I don't know how many more times that I will say it before I head off. It goes back to the fear porn. If
Yeah.
you can take minds at a certain point in people's lives, or a certain stage of people's lives, and really twist that, they will grow up or go forward with that mindset. This is a whole precedence for Scottish independence. They came in after the big housing crash. They basically introduced all this shit when David Cameron was here talking about austerity levels and stuff. They ran that campaign on fear porn based on poverty. They were throwing out statistics which were true to some degree. Like, for example, every 1 in 3 children were living in poverty in Springburn and Glasgow. These things were ultimately true. They had the local community hubs, the local housing, the local charities. Basically, they're clarifying that. But the thing is it's more like these gaps have only grown bigger for the SNPs come in, but no one wants to hold them accountable, because if they hold the SNP to account, then they have to admit that they've been duped and they've been lied to themselves. And then
Correct.
further foremost in that, the fear of basically living in poverty to having a chance to getting out of poverty on this absolute fairy tale. It's basically Cheddar Man 2.0. This is a level of propaganda that they're running. And when they realise that that's not going to be the case, people will simply mentally and physically, emotionally be destroyed, because they'll realise that they're trapped in a prison they can't escape out of.
Yeah. I don't know if you have heard me talk about this before, so forgive me if you have, or at least interrupt me if I've brought this up before to you. But when my name became public knowledge, that I was a candidate, a letter came through my letterbox about 2 days later, and it was a group who were asking for my support should I get elected. And they were campaigning to generate employment in the Inchgreen Dry Dock, which is here. And I looked into it, and obviously I gave and offered support whether I was elected or not. Now, to try and cut this right down, this all turned out not just to be a local thing. these men had organised over a period of time learned professors and experts, and they had pushed SNP into giving them a certain amount of cash to produce a report on the viability of regenerating these dry docks, not just here in Greenock, but throughout Scotland. And that was all put together. The package was complete. They had someone who was going to buy the license for 30 years to operate all of this in the East Coast, and gave it up to SNP. And the professor himself, who did all this work, said they didn't even get the courtesy of a formal letter. It was done over a telephone. They were told, no, we're not interested in this at all. And the whole proposal, Scots, was to regenerate these things, double the fleet of Karl Mack, open up Sea Link to Sweden and Norway, and other things that I can't remember, to be honest. And yet they just didn't look at the final report. They just said no. Now, how can any politician or any person claim love of country and claim that their people come first to not even have a serious look at such a proposal? I was astounded at this. This campaign still goes on, by the way.
You know, see, in many ways, right? Going back to like the Scottish independence campaign, one
Yeah,
of the biggest questions was about isolated communities. So that would be towns of ports and islands themselves.
yeah, of course.
Now, for the longest time, this country's been a shipbuilding country by some margin, and we've got to a point where they can't even build a ferry or put windows in properly. Now, if they were really serious about rejuvenating and bringing life and growing economies, what the first thing that they would have done is they would have basically put in a link into raising these port towns and cities up, raising the islands up, because by some margin, some of them are probably dated because of the lack of investment. So that they've put in proper infrastructure, put on more boats to make sure that the access there from people going from mainland to the islands, from the islands to mainland, would have been there and a lot better for them. The boats would have been a lot better standard.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
ports themselves would have been a lot better. And that would have probably meant new roads and whatnot for the local community as well. But the
correct.
fact is that they never done that. They had no interest, and they still have no interest in doing that because it would mean that they would actually have to be showing themselves to do something. So the way that they get around that, and it's like the conversation came about the free ports, I think they were called, tax-free ports,
Yeah,
and they were
yeah.
trying to use these methods to bring money into local economies. The SNP shot that down as well. They have no desire. And this is kind of like the point of smart cities, I suppose. They don't want people living on islands. They don't want people living in small communities. They want them all clustered in. If you take everything away and you let things be outdated or deteriorate or kind of just it becomes done and you don't have the means there to viably do that, then you need to basically bring people from that point and put them into a place where there is those things in
Yeah,
some degree. And that's where they'll put people in cities like Glasgow, like Edinburgh, like Aberdeen, Dundee, so on and so forth.
yeah,
And you'll probably find over the next 10 years that these islands will probably become non existent. These towns that used to be an abundance of family and community and job opportunity will wither down into nothing. It doesn't please me saying that, but it's the reality of it because with the new 15-minute local cities now, these towns just aren't practical for them because it will show that there's an alternative to a smart city.
mm.
They have no intention in having people left in peace, and C, ultimately they're just downright horrible greedy bastards.
Well, that's for sure. We're in agreement. we're definitely in agreement. And this was a huge pleasurable shock to me when I stumbled into this campaign, because it included all the things that you've spoken about. The Western Fleet was to be doubled to around 48, but it wasn't to be building ships. It was to be building catamarans, because apparently that's what the rest of the world uses these days for short sea journeys that are carrying passengers and goods, is these modern catamarans. And it just so happened that the world expert in designing these things happens to be a Scot. He lives in Australia, certainly, but he is a Scot. And you can buy these things, so to speak, you know, off the shelf. And that was also part of the plan, was to have these catamarans built here, where we once built straightforward ships. So it had many layers to it. And the other stumbling block that came out from all of this was back in Margaret Thatcher's day. She sold these assets off to a hedge fund, and it's a hedge fund that runs these things now. And that's why places like Inchgreen don't really get any work. They get enough to keep them slightly operational, and that's it. But the bulk of the work goes to other ports. Whereas this would have revitalised the Scottish docks and created new venues for jobs and getting economies going by opening up these sea routes to Scandinavia. To me, it was a missed opportunity, but it could still be viable today, I suppose. Numbers would be different,
See,
of course.
see, in the comments, there
Yeah,
was a comment by Steve: "Smart cities for stupid people."
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There is truth in that. I mean, we have allowed, and I use that word deliberately, we have allowed the supermarkets, athletes, politicians to make us think when you go into a shop that you're buying a bottle of smart water. And people buy that stuff all the time. People have been allowed to believe that artificial technology is the way of the future. People have been allowed to think that these smart technologies through electric cars and all the rest of it is the way of the future. It's not. It's a surveillance mechanism. Everything about it is dictatorial on how it's going to affect your life going forward. First, it comes in subtly as if it's a new trend or a really hip and cool thing. This is where they use these influencers to push narratives. And then behind the curtain, you've got absolutely deluded and egomaniacal psychopathic bastards like, I don't know if you've heard of the guy, John, a guy called Yuval Noah Harari,
Yeah. Oh, he
right?
is a real. Oh,
Oh,
he's
of
a
course he
piece
is.
of work. Him.
You have this, and this again, this goes down to the mindset of people. This guy is literally turned around and told people on um, conversation platforms where people actually pay to go and listen to pretty much you're going to be depopulated. Artificial technology is taking over. When we give you these things, you will have no free will.
Mm.
People won't really have a choice, and we're just giving people drugs and computer games to keep them busy until such that a day comes. This man has wrote about books
Mm.
of
And
an
people buy them.
ungodly nature. Exactly. People buy them, but more importantly, people listen and still can't read between the lines. And this is what I say people's ignorance is going to lead to consequences. Everything smart is basically for the sole design of artificial monitoring, and that even brings into your digital ID, your Q cards, everything about you. You are pretty much a barcode in That's going to affect your shopping, the way you do things, the ability how you do things, your health. And if you do not comply in any manner whatsoever, that artificial intelligence is going to shut you off completely. Now, there is a part of where people think that artificial intelligence could be a good thing. I can't say that it will be, but what I do know is when you've got people like Elon Musk, who people think is our guy because he bought Twitter
No,
for some strange
no,
reason,
no,
and
no,
he's
no.
talking about putting chips in the minds of people, like
We've been talking
nah,
about that for years, Scots.
this also ties into the artificial design of control. We've got people with, robotics at home. We've got people talking to a box, calling it Alexa, as if it's a real person having a conversation with an Alexa. All these things are to desensitize you of your absolute humane core, and you will eventually lose your soul in the process.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but it is the truth.
Well, of
But
course, that's the
I will,
truth.
I will say one thing before I head off, John.
Oh, you're heading off, are you?
I've got a 5 a.m.
Okay.
drive tomorrow.
Okay.
But
Okay. It's just we've got Exile Viking here with us now.
I'll try and take a rain check for a later date. Exiled a dear friend. But I didn't actually realise the time until I've looked at the clock there.
Well,
And
it's always good, Blether.
well, that's the thing. It's been really good, and I'm a wee bit gutted by it. But there is no hope by looking to people to fix these issues and the ongoing issues that are going to come. As I've already said on the stream tonight, in many ways, the best thing that we can do as a people is to be mindful of that. That's very important to not fall into that trap. These systems, these infrastructures, these influencers are not our guide. They are not our people. They do not represent us, our ideas, or our values.
No.
And it's going to be tricky because they're going to be starting to whip out things over the next year. Bluebeam, all these other things. If you haven't done it, go and check it. Go and check out NASA Bluebeam. Go and check out the United Nations Charter, what they're going to be doing in every country. They're going to basically uproot every person's sovereign rights. Look at the WEF, the things that they're going to be implementing. Look out for the cyber crash news. Look out for the energy stuff, because you will have a head start in preparing yourself, and always put Jesus Christ first and foremost. And I want to say, God bless each and every one of you tonight, brothers and sisters. I may not be back doing Sundays all the time, but me, DJ, and Clive will get around to doing something. That is an absolute promise. I love you all. Be kind to one another. Good night, and God bless.
Well, thank you very much, Scott's Armour, for being here. Appreciate it. As always, he's a very easy person to speak to, and he always speaks from the hip, so you don't get any nonsense with Scott's Armour. And he will return at some future point, I have no doubt.
Just before you go, Scott, just before you go, I was just going to say it's good to hear you after such a long time, brother. I was genuinely worried about you like everybody else in the chat, but it's good that you're back.
Thanks, mate. It's much appreciated. I'll get you on when I get things up and running. It's just unfortunate with the timing, mate. But honestly, it's good to hear you as well. When I look forward to obviously listening back and hearing the conversation that you have with John, mate. And you have a good night as well.
Yeah, you too. Talk to you later.
Yeah,
Bye,
you
fellas.
take care.
Bye-bye.
You take care.
Well, that was a surprise. I wasn't expecting to hear Scott's coming on, but it was good to hear his voice. I'd actually forgotten what he sounded like.
Well, he sent me an email late on this afternoon, and I said to him that I was streaming tonight, and he was welcome to come on, and it was just left as casual as that.
Yeah.
I didn't know if he was ready to come on or he still wanted to lurk in the background for a wee while, but there he was.
Yeah. But it was very interesting topics of conversation. I was listening attentively to them, but I was certainly agreeing with pretty much all of them. He's spot on about it.
I've just come across private chat from a guy I'm now talking to.
Yeah, I just said that about 10 minutes ago.
Well, I was too engaged. But the thing is, Exile, uh, Scott's Armour and myself have always been that close in agreement about
Mhm.
things in general. Where we tend to differ is on the political edge of things, just a wee bit. I still think there is room for a political movement and a need for it. But for all the other stuff, the spiritual stuff, yeah, totally agree. I mean, how many times have you heard me say it? We are the modern crusaders. Who else is there?
Exactly. We are dissidents as well.
Correct.
Dissidents in our own country.
Yep. That's what well, you heard me say that just a couple of weeks back. I consider
Mhm.
myself a dissident. I don't say right or left or anything anymore. I say I'm a dissident. And
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to use that word because it is the exact word that you should be using.
Yeah, exactly. It's like from yourself, John. I took on board the term illegal aliens rather than
Anything
economic
else?
migrants because it's more fitting and it's more correct to call it by its proper term, illegal aliens.
Yeah.
Although it's very an American term, but you know what? It's a correct term for people who enter the country illegally. Uh,
Well, just as a footnote to that, I've got it on reasonable authority that at one time in Europe, at the ambassador level, that's exactly the term they used
uh-huh. I
to,
believe they still
to
use it. I believe it's still official vocab in government and
ah,
immigration circles. They say
yeah,
illegal aliens.
yeah. But down here, where news, so-called news is reported, you see, they deliberately interchange the terms to deliberately confuse the general public, so the general public will use various different terms even in the one conversation without ever realizing it. And that's all
Yeah.
quite deliberate to hide the fact, the simple fact, that illegal aliens shouldn't be here. That's why
Yeah.
they're illegal.
Yeah. Well, they all use these sugarcoating terms basically basically just to soften up the narrative instead of just being direct. But it's all about political correctness, not wanting to offend anybody. Well, I don't care. I don't care what they like to be called or not, feelings or not. To me, they are illegal aliens. Trust me, John, I could call them much worse, but
Oh,
then I
couldn't
will
we
not
all?
do that here on your stream because I don't
Well,
want you to get struck.
well, couldn't we all, including me?
Yeah. And I know the taboo word, the C word, would involve that, but I will not say that because I know that it's not allowed on your stream. It's verboten.
It is indeed.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely. And I wanted to just quickly tell you, I've been following this American chat. It's called the 14 Word Podcast on Telegram. One of the guys lives in Texas, and he was talking about a bit of an incident at the border with the Mexicans trying to climb over the fence. One of them basically started shooting into the direction of the US, and instead of returning fire, the border guards actually retreated far back, and they were saying, "Oh no, we need to not open fire because then bullets will land on the Mexican side, and we may hit innocent people."
Oh, for
Now,
goodness sake.
now, these people, if they're so innocent, why are they trying to break into the country illegally? And it's just the Mexican authorities just stood back as well. They did nothing to. They didn't even fire tear gas at the Mexicans trying to get over the fence. And the Americans basically retreated about 100 meters, and some of them got over the fence and just ran into America.
Yeah.
I think again, everybody's too scared to even say boo because of all since, let's be honest, George Floyd's death in 2020. It's really gone downhill, law and order in the country, and it's just going to get worse, John.
No, that's for sure. Let's just change the subject a little, and I
Yeah.
hope you haven't seen this. And like always, folks, I like to play these shorts twice so you catch everything that's going on. So have a listen to this one.
I thought, you know what, this is awesome, and that allows me to classify myself as the woman of color that I am. What makes me the lesbian is the fact that I am still madly in love with my wife, and that'll never change. I'm still attracted to her as a woman. I have come out and been recognized as the first woman of color in the history of Delaware County Council.
What's really brave about you is that you came out as a trans woman of color, and yet you have changed nothing about yourself physically. So you're just literally the exact same person, but at the same time, you're a woman of color.
I did take the step of changing my name. I used to go by Ryan, the male version, but now I'm using the name Ryan, but it's the female version.
Same spelling.
Same spelling.
When you're out in front of an issue like this, there are always going to be people that doubt. What's your response to them?
To that, I would say it was just a few short years ago that they said that you couldn't identify, a man couldn't identify as a woman without taking the steps necessary to do so. And that's no longer true. I mean, I'm living proof of it. Being as that I had Cherokee on both sides, I thought, you know what, this is awesome, and that allows me to classify myself as the woman of color that I am. What makes me the lesbian is the fact that I am still madly in love with my wife, and that'll never change. I'm still attracted to her as a woman. I have come out and been recognized as the first woman of color in the history of Delaware County Council.
What's really brave about you is that you came out as a trans woman of color, and yet you have changed nothing about yourself physically. So you're just literally the exact same person, but at the same time, you're a woman of color.
I did take the step of changing my name. I used to go by Ryan, the male version, but now I'm using the name Ryan, but it's the female version.
Same spelling.
Same spelling.
When you're out in front of an issue like this, there are always going to be people that doubt. What's your response to them?
To that, I would say it was just a few short years ago that they said that you couldn't identify.
Ugh, vomit. I think I'm going to be sick here on my lap.
I'm not even sure that isn't a sketch. I think that might be a sketch.
Yeah, you know what, John? You're probably right. I'm thinking that's just a skit. That is not for real. Nobody is that stupid, and it's just bizarre.
I think they're taking the mickey. I think it's satire.
Exactly. I mean, if the guy with the beard, whoever the hell he is, if he really was not expecting that, his facial expressions would have been very evident that he is like, what the WTF? But I think that's what I think it's just a skit. It's not for real. Like a lot of these things. Yeah.
We've got a visitor. We've got Paca now. Good evening, Paca.
Evening, Paca.
Yeah, that's better.
There you go.
Hello, yeah, I just wanted to say that last bloke that was on, he's an American politician, and he's doing it on purpose.
Oh, is he?
They can't argue with him. So he is kind of trolling, but he's serious about it.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you increase your volume just a little, Paca? Just a bit soft.
Mother?
Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say was that he's a politician. He's done it on purpose because they can't argue with him because he's using their logic against them.
Right. So I was right. It's satire.
Kind of. He's doing it with a deadpan straight face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. That's what I said. It must just be it's a piss take, because if it was for real, the guy would have made a facial expression at least, but he made nothing.
One of the giveaways is that he's talking to Matt Walsh, and Matt Walsh isn't arguing with him. If you know Matt Walsh.
No, I don't.
He's dead against it.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah, I know him.
Right. Well, that all makes much more sense now.
That's all I want to say, just to put you straight on that one thing.
Well, you might as well stay now that you're here.
I'll sit quietly.
Yeah. Well, not compulsory. You don't have to sit quietly. Anyway, what can we say? Did you enjoy the conversation I had with Scott's Armour?
Did I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mind. I'm not a believer, but I didn't mind. I've no objection.
You haven't heard Scott's Armour before, have you?
I'm sure I must have done. I don't know him well.
Oh, he's been on here a couple of times. He's got his own channel. Him and DJ kind of do the double act, or used to on a Sunday. Very popular show, of course. So what have you been up to? Anything out of the way, Ed?
No, I never do anything interesting. I go to work, come home, sit back, go to bed, get up, go to work.
How's that boy of yours?
He's all right. I got him a go-kart the other week.
His own go-kart?
Yeah.
Wow. Is he not desperate to use it out in the pavement?
No.
No?
No, he's strange, my boy. He's very well behaved. He's not. He's nothing like me.
Yeah,
He's definitely
sorry.
mine, though, before anybody says anything.
I just thought I'd start just to sit like this because I just want to try an experiment. But it's all right. John knows what my ugly mug looks like behind this.
And I have the photographs to prove it.
I know you won't dox me.
So what did you make? Both of you, one at a time. We'll start with Packer. What did you make of the coronation ceremony? Did you watch any of it?
No. No, I'm not particularly royalist either, but I'm not dead against it. I like Elizabeth. I don't like Charles. Is the sum total of it? He's a globalist shill, isn't he?
Yeah.
You're exiled.
People that fly around the world constantly in their private jets telling me that I'm destroying the planet, I tend not to listen to.
Exactly. Well, I know Exile here was pretty much in admiration of the late Queen, but what do you feel about the King? Yeah.
Personally, I am on the same wavelength as Packer. No, I don't like Charles. Charles had many years he could have redeemed himself, but he failed miserably. I mean, I only watched the coronation on playback, not all of it, just the crowning and his son whispering something in his ear and the usual nonsense. But the only thing that came good out of it is at least it's a British tradition and it royally pissed off all these BAME activists and all the lefties. So for me, that was a plus. And this one black woman who went on saying, "Oh, it's all this traditionalist, it's not very inclusive." But the thing is, if it's a family thing like that, your family tends to be the same ethnicity anyway. So I don't know what that woman was trying to achieve. I forget her name, but she's an irrelevant piece of shit. Pardon the language.
The same ethnicity. Have you not seen an advert lately?
A what, Packer?
I said families of the same ethnicity. Have you not seen an advert lately?
No, but I just don't like Charles because I think Charles is an idiot and he's too much of a globalist and he's not interested in defending the faith as now it seems to be faiths, quote unquote. And I just feel it was basically a whole shit show, the whole coronation. But I think we're going to be stuck with him for the next 15, 20 years max. Given his age, he will probably live to about the same age as his late mother, and then it will probably be William. But I'm not sure really what to think, because in my opinion, the royal family, royalism ended with the death of Queen Elizabeth. And not a mad royalist, but I did actually admire Queen Elizabeth because at least she kept herself neutral to things. She did not get involved and make opinions about matters that were nothing to do with the royalty. So I just followed that. But to me, royal family and royal life all ended with the death of the Queen.
Yeah.
From
that point of view, she didn't have 60 years to go around spouting nonsense before she became Queen, did she?
No.
And back then, it wasn't done anyway. So I don't think anybody really knew what her opinion was.
She kept it private. She kept her opinion correctly, though. She was very professional right to the end. She kept any opinion she had to herself. But here's the thing. she should have retired at least 30 years ago and let Charles. But I just believe she didn't give up the throne because she just did not want her son to make a mess and damage the dynasty any more than it already has been. So that, I believe, is the reason why she stayed on so long. Hell, the women really worked herself to the bone, and that was it.
I would tend to go along with that, Exile. That's why she stayed there, was to keep him away, because she knew what he was like. After all, it was her son, for goodness sake. Have a listen to that. Have a listen to this one, guys.
Won't be paying a single penny's worth of tax on the £650 million estate he just inherited from his mother. The rest of us have to pay 40% of any inheritance over £325,000 to the government, meaning that because of this immunity, Charles has avoided paying £260 million of inheritance tax. He also isn't liable to pay income tax or capital gains tax. The king is also exempt from racial, ethnic, and sexual equality laws, meaning that it is impossible for any of the king's employees to make a complaint to the courts if they experience discrimination. But fear not, because the royal family's official website has the following to say. Although civil and criminal proceedings cannot be taken against the sovereign as a person under UK law, the monarch is careful to ensure that all their activities in a personal capacity are carried out in strict accordance with the law. Well, that's good, as long as he tries his best, I suppose. Our new king won't be paying a single penny's worth of tax on the £650 million estate he just inherited from his mother. The rest of us have to pay 40% of any inheritance over £325,000 to the government, meaning that because of this immunity, Charles has avoided paying £260 million of inheritance tax. He also isn't liable to pay income tax or capital gains tax. The king is also exempt from racial, ethnic, and sexual equality laws, meaning that it is impossible for any of the king's employees to make a complaint to the courts if they experience discrimination. But fear not, because the royal family's official website has the following to say. Although civil and criminal proceedings cannot be taken against the sovereign as a person under UK law, the monarch is careful to ensure that all their activities in a personal capacity are carried out in strict accordance with the law. Well, that's good, as long as he tries his best, I suppose. Our new king...
Any comments?
No, not surprising. No, that's all I'll say.
Well, if you was the king of a country, what would you do?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, you know, I get that it's wrong, but you know,
what would I do? Well, I suppose if I had my way, you'd all be black in chains, every last one of you. And I would be sitting now in front of a gigantic log fire, eating the best and drinking the best, while you all toil so that I can continue to eat the best.
And you would be speaking in received pronunciation, John.
Exactly. I would be speaking much more with enunciation in the tone of my voice, so that when I speak to you, Packer, you simple-minded man of the working class, you will never understand the difficulties that I endure on a daily basis.
And do you know what your full title would be, John, if you were king? You'd be King John the First of Scotland and the Second of England, because there was already a King John in England.
Was it not Prince? Was it not Prince? Or did he become king? Prince
John. King John, who took the throne after Richard the Lionheart was footing around in France, he just took it. But eventually the barons made him give up the throne. But you'd be the second King John of England, first of Scotland.
Well, there you go. Sounds good to me. All right.
Yeah.
So when you address me from now on, it's His Majesty or Your Majesty.
Or my liege. Yes, my liege.
Oh, I prefer that. Well,
my liege.
Yeah, I like that as well, Packer. Well, you good subjects, I think we'll have to do something for you. How would a nice, new, fresh horse suit you? You can either eat it or use it for transport.
I'll go for eat it.
But when you look at that whole area, it's just mired in greed and opulence. And that's what's wrong with it. My idea, the way I look at it politically, is this: there's a lot of people in this country like the royal family and the pageantry and all of that. And I understand that. I like it myself. But what they tend to neglect is that they do really have an influence in the politics in this country. And on top of that, the wealth is just, well, it's beyond speaking about, to be honest with you. I like the European model where you have a man and a woman married, of course, a number of children, and I don't mind if they have a lot of children. I don't. And that is the royal household. That's it. And they turn up when they're needed. They know the costumes to wear, and they wear them and on state occasions and all the rest of it. But otherwise, they live a quiet life. And the best model I give forward for that is Denmark.
Yep.
You're just as likely to see the Queen down at Tesco as you are Mrs. Smith from your next door neighbour.
Exactly. My dad has actually seen the Queen cycling past, but I've not, many times I've been in Copenhagen, I've not actually clapped eyes on her. But apparently she does cycle every Sunday, but she's got her security outfit trailing behind her, but she's more in touch with the local people and they seem to like her. But I agree with what you're saying there, John. The royal family needs to really be brought down to a small level like that, like the European model.
Yeah. We can still keep all the pageantry and all the rest of it, because there are millions of people who do get a lot out of that.
Yeah.
The other thing that would need to be done here, and I don't know what Packer's thoughts on it are, is all these special awards that they give out. All of that needs to be cleaned up so that people who are getting their award really deserve it. What do you think about that, Packer?
Well, I think Sir Jimmy Savile might have something to say about
that. Well, it's to stop all of that. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree.
We should have Mrs. Smith, who's been a traffic warden for the last 29 years, never missed a day and all this sort of stuff. It's people like that should be rewarded and highlighted in our societies. People who actually add to the community that they live in. And if you're going to give sports people awards, and I think you have to be very prudent with the number that you give out, otherwise it becomes meaningless in itself. Something's only has a value if it has a limit to it.
Yeah.
It used to be the case that a university degree was worth something, but it was only worth something because very few people had one. The minute everybody has one, then it has no value.
True enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, I once fell for the gibberish that's put out about university degrees, about how women are now more numerous than young men at uni.
Come in, bedtime.
And more. Oh, there's a boy. Hi there.
See you in the morning.
Anyway, the point I'm getting to is when you look at the degrees that young girls are receiving in the subjects that they receive them in, they're not worth a damn. They're just not worth a damn. Now, as I was saying to Scott's Armour earlier, what we need to do, if we had the political authority, would be to reduce the social science departments and faculties back to a limit in terms of staff, back to a limit before the Second World War. And that would immediately reduce the number of undergraduate students that any department can take and would slow down the flow of these brainwashed children that are coming out with these useless degrees.
But you know what, John? I think we've passed that point of no return. We're never going to achieve that. Not in the current climate just now that we are. It's just going to have to get worse before it gets better.
Well,
You'd have to go in.
So go
You'd
ahead,
have to
Pat.
go in and completely restructure the education system because they've set it up to help themselves, haven't they?
Yeah. Well,
The
of
only
course.
way to make that, to get that to change, you would have to vote in a political party which is completely a break from all the useless crop that we have now and all the paid opposition, because that's all Tory and Labour are either way, paid opposition when they're sitting on the opposite side of the aisle. You would really need to, and I'm going to have to say, you would actually need a dictatorship for at least 10, 15 years to really sort out the mess.
I
And
don't know. Well, I don't know if I'm going to live that long. That's the problem.
But there are other people who after you can do it, John. They can pass on the reins.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah, but that's all. That's my opinion. I might be wrong. I just feel that the only thing now to redeem us would be a dictatorship. We have no other choice.
Well, we already have the mechanism. Believe it or not, folks, this is really true. Politics for me was usually conducted across the kitchen table in the days when my friends were still on this side of the grave. And a long time ago, long time ago, before I was even 40, we had collectively come to the conclusion that there was enough laws had been passed that anyone coming to power who really wanted to rule in that singular way wouldn't have a lot of work to do because it's all there in place already.
Yeah. John, have you seen in the chat? DJ makes a good point there. It was in referring to what I said there. He says, "You're right, Exiled. It has surpassed that because it's not just universities now. It is in primary schools and nurseries. Yep, that is it. Catching them nice and early so that they'll just think that's normal by the time they reach 12 or 16.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely, Exile. I mean, that's part of the whole business of reducing the age of voting to 16.
Yeah.
So you have that crop of young people coming out with no life experience and voting for a particular party. This is the same stuff they condemned after the Second World War when they were occupying Germany. They actually condemned all of this stuff. All of it was condemned. And here we are.
Exactly. Basically,
I think it should be
hypocrite.
up to about 40.
Sorry, that?
So I think it should be upped to 40.
Well, could you make an argument for returning to the system where you needed to be a landowner or a property owner?
I wouldn't go that far, but I do think you certainly need to have lived a lot more and experienced much more and got a better angle on the world than you have when you're 18.
I would say it all back to 21, Parker.
Yeah, all right, I'll meet you there.
Because that has been traditionally an age where various doors are open because you're that age now. You're assumed to be this, that, or other.
Yeah, saying that though, John, 21-year-olds these days aren't like when I was 21 or when you were.
No, I know that's true as well. Of course. And you're back to the same problem that we always meet because it's there.
Yeah.
And that is, sorry, Exile, this one wee bit.
No, I'm coughing. Sorry, I'm coughing.
Oh, but my coffee. Everything is so corrupted. Every institution is so corrupted. It's going to take a government or a regime to take power and keep it. Because it's going to take a long time to fix this.
Yeah.
Long time.
But here's the thing you mentioned there about 21-year-olds. Have you seen the state of your average British 21-year-old? Hell, they're so infantile. It's just there's no hope for them. And they go around with this one way of thinking that they've all been programmed to think. And if you so much as contradict their opinion, they go into basically a meltdown. And you can see the wheels in their little heads ticking along as they frown and they try to process what you've just said. Like one example, a few weeks ago, I forgot to tell you about this, John. This white guy who was sitting in the pub and he was talking about BLM, and I just happened to say, "What are you talking about?" And he's going on about all this so-called systemic racism. I said, "Yeah, but that's really just that's a myth. That's just basically a grift for certain elements of society to make money out of it." I'm saying, and black people are basically pawns in this game. They're basically weaponizing it and they're using them. He said, "Oh no, have you seen the racism?" I said, "Well, if we were so racist, why is there a Pakistani first minister in charge of Scotland? Why is there all these ethnic minorities?" And his head was pondering, trying to figure what I'm saying. And then I just said, well, at the end of the day, all lives should matter. Why should black lives just be given center stage? And he said, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to tell you to go away because you're making racist comment." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm just being factual." I said, "But if you want me to be really splitting hairs here, white lives also matter because we need fair representation." And I said, "Did you know there's an anti-white agenda going on?" He said, "No, there is not. That is basically a conspiracy theory." I said, "Well, if you look at every advert and you look at everything that's is advertisement everywhere, you can't get away with it. It's always mixed race or blacks." And then he's like, "And?" I said, "And there, so read between the lines. You can see that white people are basically being discriminated against right here in Scotland." He shut up and then he moved away and he said, "Anyway, nice chatting to you. Have a good night." I said, "You too." I know that he knew I was right, but he didn't want to agree with me. I just got that feeling that he knew it was correct.
Yeah, but that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, people who think that way, they don't encounter people like us often enough. That's also part of the problem. It's back to this: we're isolated. Well, maybe Pack isn't because he's got a local pub that he goes to and people know him and there's probably a usual crowd there. But most pubs are not occupied by such loyal customers because they lost half their customers when they brought in the ban.
Correct. Yeah.
And that was part of the plan. That was part of the
Yeah.
plan, was to separate smokers from non-smokers so that we become the bad guys.
Well, I was one of the smokers in the pub. You see, I came of drinking age in 2002, but I'd been drinking 2 or 3 years before that on the sly. But even back in 2003, people were already talking about there's a smoking ban coming in, and I went, "Ugh, that's never going to happen." And I did say it. I said, "They'll lose a lot of customers that way." And I was right. As soon as a smoking ban came, within a couple of years, pubs were becoming emptier and emptier, and then some just closed because of the lack of business. But this is what happens. They drove away, and I believe it's all been done deliberately. It's not just for people's health. It's another way of controlling people, seeing how much they can get away with. And there was no protest that was barely worth mentioning.
No, it's one of my personal aggravations, to be honest with you, because I remember when Nigel Lawson stood up in the House of Commons and announced proudly with a glass of very good malt in his hand that from here on in, cigarettes would rise X amount percent above the rate of inflation, regardless of what the rate of inflation would be. And it has been that way ever since. And not a mutter. Not a mutter. And then when they several years later, they tried the same with alcohol, and there was an uproar. And I used to say that to my pal Jerry. It was one of those places where we didn't agree. Yeah, well, where were you? I would say to him. Where were you when they were taxing my bad habit? Why should I support your bad habit because you didn't support mine and we became isolated?
Exactly. No, but I did smoke. I used to smoke cigarettes before I took up the pipe, John. And I remember, man, a lot of young people of a certain age don't know that before that you could smoke in pubs. To them, it's unthinkable. And I have told often, I said, I remember the good old days when you could smoke in the pub without going outside in the pissing rain. And in 2002, I remember cigarettes that I bought was £4.60 already. So yeah, it was a lot of money, but I kind of got a bit of financial help from my family because I was first year at university. But when I started working, I would buy my own. But even then, my point is, even if you'd raise it to £50 or £100, it's not going to stop people smoking. People are still going to get money and they're still going to smoke. So if their idea of getting people to stop is by raising the price, well, all I can say is good luck. In Scandinavian countries, tobacco, easily a pack of 20 Marlboro can probably be about £13, £14, but that doesn't stop people smoking. And the same with alcohol, very expensive. And yet, Norway, for instance, has a very high percentage of alcoholics. So obviously, these price hikes don't work. They're not stopping anybody.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to go into the cigarette thing. I was pointing out it, especially when we think of the pubs. I took my pal Jerry through the whole series of devices that have been used to kill pubs. And why are pubs important? Because it was one of the few places that men, especially men, could come together and argue about football, women, and politics. So it had to be eliminated because that was a dangerous place. And the first thing they did was create lounges and then encourage women to drink in public. And put carpets in these places, and put up the prices, discourage drinking of beer and the encouragement of shorts for all sorts of reasons. Then the next thing it was brought in, of course, was jukeboxes. Now you can't talk because there's a loud jukebox going on.
Oh, I know.
Normally music you don't like.
You have to go, John. My computer's playing up again.
Sorry?
I'll see you all later. Kick me out.
Oh, you going?
Yeah, kick me out. My computer's playing up.
Okay.
All right.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. DJ he posted a comment there. You should highlight it. Yeah, it's basically it's correct there, and they're never going to achieve it. The Scottish government, what he says in there, should highlight it.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
That one.
That one. Thing
Yeah.
is, the thing though in Scotland, the government have put out a long-term agenda to create smoking-free generations. Their words, not mine. How they intend to go about this, however, is a bit open for debate. Well, I would much rather see DJ. How about families going from generations to generations, mum, dad, and Wayne's, and that being perpetuated into the future as it once was? That would do society a lot more good than trying to concentrate on people who decide to smoke cigarettes, cigars, and the pipe. It's all about intention, and the intention is to completely destroy the man-woman relationship that God created. It's to destroy that ultimately. And they don't care how they achieve it if they use all these different means to separate us, atomize us, and ultimately set us against women, and they've been quite successful at that. And we have to be aware of that. Like Scott's Armour was saying, we have to be aware of that on a spiritual level as well as a physical.
Mhm.
Because there is nothing else. We only have ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't believe we're anywhere near the time of the return of Jesus. I don't think we are anywhere near that. I think we've got a long way to go. God help us all, because it will only get worse.
Well, I see it getting worse is the only thing I can see. I do despair for the future, but what's happening in France right now is sooner or later going to jump the channel and hit the UK. I'm talking about the protesting and the civil unrest, which is starting to unfold in France and Ireland too.
MYT is saying the kids are far better behaved than my generation. They do not even cheek you on the street. They are cowed for some reason. Well, that to me is the problem. MYT, believe it or not, and I'm not honestly making this stuff up, it's part of the reason I came on in the first place. I'm old enough, folks, to remember a time when my great-grandparents were alive and my grandparents were alive. But I was instructed that if I were going through the town and I saw an old person, and it was always a woman they used, if you see an old lady at the pavement edge trying to get across the street, you need to go over, take her bag from her, and take her arm and help her across the street. That was the way I was taught, and I do remember doing it. Now that's a far cry from what MYT's talking about. But that requires family. And we're always back to this. We always get back to you need family, you need mum, you need dad for that balance of influence. And they need to be filled with, and I will use this term, righteousness. They have to have a strong morality. And with that strong morality comes righteousness. And that is where it all has gone wrong, because they attacked the whole idea of God, and God was removed from the center and placed in some unknown place. And then they went to work on the establishment of the church, etc. And that's where most people got their sense of morality. They got it from the pulpit. Not all the time, but most of the time. And that's all gone. So you're back to this, where do we start? Well, we're back to, as have been saying for a long time, you're back to individual people. You're back to making sure that you, as an individual, are the best person or the best version of that individual that you can be. And that way, it will show to those around you, to lesser or a more acute state. And that may rub off on them. It probably will eventually. And I think that's a positive way forward that everyone can engage in. Because we don't have that shepherd in the pulpit anymore. And most people need them. Because most people aren't bright enough to think their own moralities out. What do you think?
No, I agree. Yeah.
And that's why I say, I only speak for myself when I say this. Most of the time when I'm on here, that's what I'm doing. it sort of seems like politics, but that's all it is. It's not really politics. It's not the politics that it should be. Politics should be about nuts and bolts,
Hmm.
but it's not. It's really an engagement with evil. So you're pushed into the situation of being a crusader, whether you wanted it or not. There is no other position to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the left, all the Marxists, they hate the whole point, the whole fact that white people, some of us still have bullshit detectors at work. We want to collectivize as a people. And they've been systematically working on that and destroying it at every turn of the way. But I'm sorry to say, but it's sooner or later, the game is going to be up for these people. And when it does, it's game over because not all of us are going to be kowtowed into submission. So I, for one, and I think I speak for everybody in the chat, plus yourself, John, they will never make me yield to their shit. I will never yield to them. They will have to kill me first.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that dramatic end, shall we?
I know that's me being dramatic, but basically I'm not going to submit to them. And as well as the other thing, I'm not going to submit to a certain persuasion who are making threats that everybody will become like them. I'm like, yeah, you try it. You're never going to make me become one of you. I think you know who I'm talking about.
Oh,
These
yeah.
these loud mouths. Yeah.
Yeah. MYT said, John, we were taught respect our elders. Absolutely. Not talking about old people, just kids in general seem to be cowed in some way. I know, I assumed, MYT, that you were generalizing about the younger people. I know that. Some are pretty hot as we are. I know a few, not many, but I do know a few. I know one lad in particular, and he tells me this, so I assume he's not lying to me. Above his bed in his bedroom, he has two portraits of two different European men who lived at the same time and were politically involved with each other. One was born in Austria and was a painter, and the other one was born in Italy and worked in newspapers for a short time. And these two individuals are this young man's heroes, and he will constantly say, we need people like that again to sort it out.
I'm afraid he's right, John. Yep. Without all the negative that went with it, but the principles need to come, and something
Well,
like that needs to appear to put the
that,
country right. In fact, the whole of Europe, for that matter.
well, again, that's what Scots was saying. And again, I would agree that the principle of a righteous leader is what we need. I've always said this. What we need is a man who comes from the working class, who's educated, who can speak, who can convey to the mass,
Yeah.
or basically ill-equipped folk, to get them to understand what the problems are and have confidence that he can eventually bring about solutions. That's what we've always needed. That's what we still need.
A charismatic leader as well, as one who is intelligent and knows how to articulate to get the message out to the normal person.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I don't know if you know this, John, but every year on the anniversary of the Italian gentleman's death, people still come to his tomb and they put flowers, they say prayers, and they sing songs. In fact, his family tomb has never been vandalized, and it's still to this day adored by people who come all over the world to see it. There's a life-size bust of him, which I'm surprised the government in Italy did not actually try to get rid of all this, basically turning him into a saint. But that shows you that people want solutions, and that's why they refer to the past like that, because strong leaders like that are very short and few between.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I always like to remember or remind people, should I say, that the problems of today are not the problems of yesterday. And therefore, anything that we can learn from that time is limited to certain areas, and other parts of it needs to be left where it is in the ashes of history,
Yeah.
in my view.
Yeah. The other thing is, as well, John, although the Austrian one was a very good orator, and I've done a lot of reading in some of his speeches have been transcripted. As you know, I can speak German, so
Yeah.
I don't rely on translation. But when you read into all that he said, it actually makes sense. And a lot of what he said then is actually happening now.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah.
just that he always mentioned the Marxist element is the bane to Europe, and that is what will destroy Europe. And we will drown in a sea of red. It's words to those effects, and he was right. The institutions now have been infiltrated by all these cultural Marxists. Yeah, so I
Well,
have to
again,
say he was right.
I have to state the obvious here. You see, the thing is that when the Soviet Union fell, people actually thought that communism disappeared,
Oh no, it never did.
because you've got to ask, well, what happened to all those communist men and women who worked for the regime before it collapsed? What happened to them? Did they suddenly become
Oh no.
capitalists?
Once a communist, always a communist till the day you die. That's what my father said. They were brainwashed as young children and young adults. So it's basically all they ever knew. And they never became capitalists. Although some did actually emigrate to the West, but they remained communist in mindset. And they tried to bring their nonsense in. And again, they're having some success because what many people in the East escaped from eventually became neo-communism, and the EU is basically a mirror image of the old USSR. It's now the EUSSR, and even people from former communist countries are admitting that. And I speak often with people online, and they say, "Yep, the way things are going in the West is very much what my grandparents tried to get rid of and escape from." So they're now telling me that the countries of sanctuary are ironically now the former Soviet satellites, Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia. It's so ironic that we used to be the free world, and now they are more free in speech and general. They're not into all this political correct nonsense and LGBT agenda and trans shit and things.
Well,
And they're
well, you,
Christian
you
countries.
missed out. You missed out one of the countries, of course, there, and that has to be Russia.
Well, I was meaning more in the Europe that we know, but yeah,
Right.
Russia.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Russia is certainly not buying into all this ideology and destroying themselves from within, because that's all the ideologies are doing to Western Europe. They're destroying our societies. Where Russia doesn't, it's still basically as it is.
Well, it's essentially returned to its traditional roots of Christianity, um, and the churches are apparently, from what I can gather, packed out all the time, and the church is growing, physically growing. More churches are being built and opened.
Yeah. And let's not forget, John, that Vladimir Putin used to work with the KGB. So again, he's a lifelong communist in his mind, but he basically still is now running Russia like it was under the old Soviet Union, but with a little bit of capitalism thrown in. Some would say that he's a tyrant, a dictator, but then again, don't if it's coming from the Western media, you know a lot of its agenda pushed, and I never believe everything they say about Putin. But I'm sure he has his country's best interests at heart before he sells it out. He would not do that.
I have also heard a few commentators say that what is operating in Russia and China is a form of social nationalism. And I'm putting it that way deliberately.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the case, then it kind of supports the idea that's why it has to be destroyed. But in my own view, there are many more reasons why certain parties want to destroy Russia, and it's more historical than it is anything else. Again, you see, we're limited to what we can say on here. This is the trouble.
But I do also believe Russia is basically, some of them, many of them are paid opposition, and they're all basically being corrupted by, you know who, the Rothschilds, all these people, and a certain agenda has been pushed basically to try and destroy them. And I think they're using the Ukrainian crisis as their stepping stone to do it. That's just my opinion. If I can word it a bit.
Again, I go back, before Karl Marx, and as far as I'm concerned, the attack is on the man-woman relationship, the spirituality of that. Because that was divinely created, and therefore, if you're trying to destroy that, then you obviously have to be working for the other side, and we use the general term evil to describe such folk. And that's where we are. And you know that yourself. How many times I've said this? We're no longer engaged in straightforward politics. We're engaged in a battle of good versus evil. And we will win. We will win. We will not be disappeared from this realm, because this realm belongs to us, not to the forces that are trying to destroy us. It's just that simple and that complicated. But I'm a great believer that we need a political party, or more than one party, who can exist and be there and grow, because eventually we will get little pockets of authority and power, and each of those little steps will help us remain a group, and eventually we will take back not just Scotland, but the whole of Christendom. But I want to see that. You might, you never know.
I hope so. Well, I hope we all do. I certainly know that I have a good chance that I can probably not see it, but maybe the generation after me. But I'm very hopeful that things will start to work its way slowly within the next decade or so. Well, first of all, we need to get rid of the EU, and we need to get out of the UN Charter, because that is what's holding us back.
Well, I've said this before, and it's not as simple as I make it out to be. These documents are only pieces of paper with writing on them. They're easily torn up. But as I've said in private as well as public, the trouble with that kind of attitude, and it's the kind of attitude I'd like to take, is it would reap a lot of problems on the people of the country. And unless they were prepared for hardships, it couldn't be done that way. It would have to be done so-called diplomatically over a period of time. But I would ignore it all, because it's not there for anyone's good except their own. It's part of the whole idea of a one world government nonsense.
And you know who's pushing all that? Especially a particular group starting with the letter Z.
Well, what can I say? There are Zionists everywhere. Exactly. So I'm going to wrap up, folks, because believe it or not, we've been on for 2.5 hours. And I hope you've all enjoyed it. I know I have. I wasn't sure whether Scott's Armour would join me, but he did, and that was really great. And for those who have not heard me speak to Scott's Armour, he usually speaks exactly what I'm thinking. There's never a disagreement. But it's also been interesting to have Exiled on as well as Packer, because everyone has got something unique to offer the conversation. But I still think we're all broadly on the same road. It's just some of us don't see it quite yet as being really a spiritual journey we're on. We really are the modern crusaders, folks, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I wasn't really planning to stay on very long, but I ended up just joining our wee chat. Initially, I came on to say hi to Scott's Armour, but hey, I'm glad I stayed on.
Well, I kind of thought that's why you were on, because Scott's Armour was on. He's always been a popular figure amongst our ranks, Scott's Armour.
Yeah. No, I really was concerned because many months ago, when you said Scott's Armour is probably never going to come back. No, but even around that time and a little after, I actually did think the worst. I thought the poor guy had actually passed and there was no way of ever finding. No, I was basically up in the air about it, because when you don't have information about people, your mind goes havoc, goes all over the shop.
It can do. It can do. Okay, any last words then, Exiled?
Yeah, just aim high and get it over with. Make it quick.
Okay, I'll take you out of the
All
last. Right. Okay, folks. Well, there you go. I hope you've all enjoyed the surprise guests tonight. I know I have. And I will, as always, say adios, au revoir, cheerio, and until Thursday evening, 9 o'clock, goodbye for now. Enjoy the music, and I will get out of the way.
Silently the snow falls, paints a winter scene, swiftly spreads the dark rim, hides the fading autumn green. Moonbeams brush the dark wood, conjure friendships dear to me. Lightly now the breeze flows, disturbing more than just the leaves. But life's much more than we can know. We are one small glow in the eternal flow. Patiently the love grows, lifts the weary heart. Gently now she holds me, melts two worlds once apart. Moonbeams brush the dark wood, usher dreams of you and me. Softly then the breeze blows, disturbing more than just the trees. But love's much more than we can know. We are one small glow in the eternal flow. Melodies of long ago, songs of innocence, harmonies to soothe the soul, have some consequence. Moonbeams brush the dark wood, awakening joys of you and me. Silently the snow falls, bringing winter symphony. But we're much more than we can know. We are one small glow in the eternal flow. But life's much more than we can know. We are one small glow in the eternal flow.